The last thing Admiral Zelnara expected was a transmission from the outer edge of Sector 9Z, where nothing ever happened. It was a backwater, a speck of cosmic dust, barely worth patrolling. But the trembling voice of Commander Veltor came through, distorted, ragged, and soaked in terror. "Repeat, we've encountered a hostile, single vessel. It's not like anything in the records. Hull damage ineffective. It's cutting through our defenses. We need reinforcements immediately." Then static. Admiral Zelnara's two hearts beat faster. She flicked her wrist, pulling up the scout ship's final sensor data. What she saw made her blood go cold. A single ship, sleek and black like obsidian, tore through one of the Empire's top recon fleets. Not just tore, humiliated them. The ship bore no markings, no transponder ID. It didn't match any known species within the mapped quadrants. Yet its weapons, God, its weapons, sliced through triarium armor like it was paper. Zelnara called for an emergency session of the Council. The room filled with the highest-ranking officials of the Galactic Empire, each more bloated with power and arrogance than the last. "We believe it to be a rogue AI," said Minister Daxil, voice clipped, dismissive, "possibly Drenthian. Their black market always produces such curiosities." "No," Zelnara snapped. "The ship didn't move like an AI. It moved like a pilot was inside. A human pilot." That drew scoffs, hushed laughter. "Humans?" spat Chancellor Vries. "Those primitives?" Barely clawed out of their own atmosphere 400 cycles ago, they were declared extinct, another sneered. "The Empire wiped out Earth during the expansion wars. I remember the holovids. The flames lit up a moon." Zelnara threw the holovid onto the central screen. Footage of the engagement. The human ship dancing between laser bursts, cloaking mid-flight, phasing out of conventional physics. And then, the weapon. A blue-white beam erupted from beneath the craft, punching through the Empire's flagship. It didn't explode. It simply ceased to exist. That shut everyone up. "Impossible," Vries whispered. "That technology is—" "Gone," Zelnara said. "It's supposed to be gone, just like the humans." For the first time in centuries, the Empire felt fear. Back on the edge of 9Z, the scout ship floated among the wreckage, its hull scorched but intact. Inside, the pilot leaned back, boots kicked up on the console. He looked human, almost too human. His eyes were sharp, green, unnaturally calm. He cracked a smirk. The comms chimed. "Fleet Command to HSS Revenant," a voice crackled. "Report status. Target neutralized. Empire recon fleet obliterated. No casualties on our end." There was a pause. "Revenant, you're not authorized to engage primary Empire forces without command directive." The pilot laughed quietly. "Wasn't an engagement, just a warning." More silence. "Understood. Status of mission objective?" The pilot turned to the empty co-pilot seat, where a small AI drone hovered silently. He answered with 5 chilling words. That was only a scout ship. Far beyond, in the black nothing between stars, ships stirred, hundreds of them, then thousands. The silence of space shivered as thrusters roared to life. Each vessel was different, some built in lunar hangars, others in asteroid belts, even a few refitted from ancient Terran designs. The human fleet was awake, and they were coming home. The silence over the Empire's core systems was heavier than ever before. Officially, nothing had changed. The news channels spun out distractions, celebrations on Neral Prime, the birth of a royal clutch on Drosis III, a new luxury cruiser unveiled on Velmora. But underneath all that, behind closed blast doors and encrypted channels, the Empire was bracing for something it had long considered impossible. A return. The humans, it seemed, were not only alive, but evolving. Admiral Zelnara stood at the bridge of the Vigilant Spear, watching as her fleet scrambled into new formations. She had personally ordered redeployments from 12 sectors. Defensive rings were forming around key trade routes, science hubs, and above all, Capital Core. But she knew it wouldn't be enough. Not against that. Not against the ship that had survived the expansion wars, that had evaded detection for decades, and now danced through Imperial cruisers like it was playing a game. The humans hadn't just returned. They had waited. Watched. Prepared. "Report," she said, not turning from the viewport. "High-energy readings across the Makar expanse," her lieutenant said quietly. "Multiple ships entering from uncharted jump points. We estimate over 400 unknown contacts so far, all matching Terran heat signatures." Zelnara's fingers tightened on the rail. "Any hails?" "No," the officer said. "Not even threats, just movement. Silent, coordinated." They weren't here to talk. The Admiral felt something she hadn't felt in a century of war. Dread. Meanwhile, far from the panic and preparations, a war room was alive beneath the Martian ice crust, deep inside the forge, the hidden command hub of humanity's resistance. The room was circular, filled with warm amber lights and the steady hum of reactors buried below. Along the center table stood the leaders of the Terran Reclamation Initiative, military minds, ex-scientists, and the few remaining veterans of Earth's fall. At the head of the table stood Commander Rhea Miles, the iron-eyed woman whose face had been plastered across the Empire's bounty boards for 20 years. Her hair was silver now, not from age, but from radiation exposure during one of the early jumps into Imperial space. She didn't flinch as the hologram of the Revenant's pilot flickered to life. "You broke protocol, Amon," she said. The man leaned forward, his face calm. "They needed to know we're not dead." "They already knew we were alive," Rhea said. "You wanted them to fear us." He smiled, no apology in it. "And now they do." Rhea turned away, walking toward a massive galactic map. Red pins were spreading fast, marking human ships across dozens of sectors. "We're not ready. The main fleet isn't fully armed. We haven't secured our AI relays. We don't even have full control over Sol's outer ring." Amon's voice dropped, more serious now. "The Empire's getting nervous. Nervous means mistakes. Mistakes give us leverage." She faced him again. "We need to be united before we attack, Amon. Not just bold." He nodded once. "That's why I came back. I've seen what they've built. Their empire is bloated, lazy. It's all show. Underneath, they're hollow." Rhea didn't argue. Deep down, she agreed. The Empire had become a monument to its own arrogance, but that didn't make it any less dangerous. "Then it's time," she said. "We activate Protocol Phoenix." Gasps rippled around the room. Protocol Phoenix meant only one thing. Humanity was no longer hiding. It was reclaiming what had been stolen. Back in Empire space, Chancellor Vries sat trembling in his chambers. A new report had just arrived. A human fleet had bypassed the defense ring on Kelveron 6 without triggering a single sensor. When investigators finally reached the area, they found nothing but silence. No debris, no distress calls. Just one message, scorched into the moon's surface. "We remember Earth." And now the galaxy would remember too. In the heart of the Galactic Empire, panic was the new order of the day. Not that they admitted it, of course. On the surface, the Senate still paraded in their glowing robes. The Emperor still made hollow declarations of strength, and the media screamed about threats that were handled and under control. But beneath that shine, the machine was breaking down. Fleet Command had begun quietly pulling ships back from the outer colonies. Trade convoys were rerouted, military production tripled, and for the first time in 500 years, the draft was reinstated. No one spoke of it openly, but the whispers were everywhere. The humans are coming. On a cargo transport drifting above the mining colony of Verdanus 4, a young dockhand named Lauren stared up at a holoscreen in the mess hall. His hands trembled as he watched the newsfeed cycle. Entire moons vanishing without a trace. Empire patrols wiped out in ambushes, no survivors. An old Earth transmission, last used before their extinction, detected in over 30 systems. Most terrifying of all was what the humans weren't doing. They weren't claiming territory. They weren't broadcasting demands, no ultimatums, no threats, just movement. Lauren turned to the grizzled old soldier at the table beside him, a man who'd fought during the expansion wars and lived to retire. "They're ghosts," the man said quietly. "The humans. You think we wiped them out, but they're shadows now. You don't see them coming until you're already dead." And that was the truth. The Empire didn't fear what it saw. It feared what it couldn't understand. Meanwhile, deep beneath the Martian surface in the forge, Commander Rhea Miles stood in front of her assembled generals. The map behind her now bled red. Human-controlled corridors stretching like veins through forgotten parts of the galaxy. Old smuggling lanes, dead zones no one had bothered to chart in centuries. That's where humanity had built its strength, in the places the Empire considered beneath notice. "Phoenix has been activated," she said. "Now comes Phase 2. The murmurs in the room died, every ear tuned to her voice. "We cripple their communications, not just a blackout. I want every major relay jammed or hijacked. We feed them chaos, wrong coordinates, false reports. Let them eat each other alive with fear." "Civilian targets?" someone asked. Rhea's jaw tightened. "Number, we do not touch their civilians. This isn't vengeance. It's reclamation." Eamon smirked from across the room. "And what if they don't see the difference?" "Then they'll learn it the hard way." She gestured to the side. A hologram appeared, a massive orbital platform above the gas giant Tertian 7. It was one of the Empire's oldest command stations, but still one of the most secure. "This is our first real strike, not a probe, not a scout. We hit them where it hurts." "Won't that trigger full retaliation?" asked her tactical chief. Rhea's eyes gleamed. "That's the point." 2 days later, Tertian 7's citadel vanished in a blue flash. No warning, no alarms, no survivors. Surveillance footage showed a human fleet dropping out of stealth, 20 ships, all coated in non-reflective nanoshielding, moving in total sync. They didn't speak. They didn't hesitate. They unleashed hell. The citadel was obliterated in under 7 minutes, and just before the signal cut out, one phrase rang out across every comm channel within 10 light-years. "This is for Earth." The Empire's leadership fell into chaos. Some urged diplomacy, others called for total extermination. But none of their responses came fast enough. By the time they regrouped, 3 more installations had gone dark. Out in the void, aboard the Revenant, Eamon watched the starfields drift past. His fingers tapped idly on the console, rerouting data from recent strikes. The Empire was flailing, and flailing meant they were losing. "Status of Fleet Prime?" he asked the AI. "All ships are in position, awaiting your signal." He looked out, and in his mind he saw Earth. Not the smoldering ruin left behind, but the home that used to be. The cities, the blue oceans, the laughter, all gone because of them. Now they would understand what it meant to burn. "Send the message," he said. The AI obeyed. Across the Empire, a single phrase flooded every channel, burned into every screen. "That was only a scout. The storm begins now." The moment that message hit, the Galactic Empire snapped. What little calm remained was obliterated. Entire systems went into lockdown. Trade stopped overnight. Luxury planets turned their pleasure fleets into makeshift defense outposts. Imperial Command scrambled to project strength, but no one was fooled. Not after Tertian 7. Not after 3 more citadels followed within days. Everywhere, the name Terrans returned to the forefront of galactic speech. For centuries, it had been a ghost story. A cautionary tale told to cadets about the warlike species that had once resisted the Empire with nothing but scraps and rage. But now the ghosts had come back, with better weapons, better ships, and a bone-deep hatred that had fermented in silence. On the fringe planet of Korlax Phi, the civilians had already started evacuating before the Empire even issued an order. Word spread that a Terran ship had been spotted near the moons. No attack came, but the fear itself was enough. Markets collapsed, riots broke out, and local militia units refused to return to post. It wasn't the humans' weapons that tore the Empire apart. It was their memory. Meanwhile, in the forge, Rhea Miles stood before a solemn crowd. The war was no longer hypothetical. It was real. Blood had been spilled. The reclamation had begun in full. "We've struck fear into their hearts," she said, her voice calm but hard. "But fear alone doesn't win a war. It weakens the enemy. What comes next breaks them." Beside her stood Dr. Kalen Voss, a former biochemist turned cyber strategist, one of the few survivors from Earth's original obliteration. His hands trembled slightly from old radiation scars as he pulled up a projection of the Empire's neural comm-net. "This is the Imperial Cortex Grid," he explained. "They use it to coordinate fleet movement, manage food distribution, even control propaganda across thousands of systems. Take it down, and their entire structure collapses." Rhea nodded. "And how do we do that?" He smiled grimly. "We don't attack it. We infect it." The room went silent. "It's not just code," Kalen continued. "It's a virus, one we've been breeding for decades. A data worm that speaks their machine language, lives inside their updates, and spreads like wildfire." Eamon raised an eyebrow. "And once it spreads," Kalen's voice dropped, "it turns their order into noise, ships rerouted into ambushes, supplies redirected to black holes, entire fleets misinformed. The Empire will turn its guns on itself." Rhea leaned in. "And no civilian deaths?" Kalen gave a slow, solemn nod. "Minimal. Targeting command centers, military chains, and data hubs only. Their people don't deserve what their leaders brought upon us." There was a beat of silence before Rhea finally spoke. "Launch it." And just like that, the virus, codenamed Ember, was unleashed. Within days, strange things began happening across the Empire. A food convoy meant for the High Senate was accidentally delivered to an abandoned penal colony. A destroyer fleet chasing a supposed human flotilla arrived at empty coordinates and ran headfirst into an asteroid belt. An elite strike team was dispatched to intercept a Terran base, only to discover they had been rerouted mid-jump into a sun. To the Empire, it looked like sabotage, incompetence, betrayal. Accusations flew, alliances shattered, and within weeks, multiple high-ranking officials had each other assassinated in secret. They didn't know the truth. The humans were inside the system. Aboard the Revenant, Eamon stared at the real-time feed from over 70 infected systems. His smirk had faded now. What he saw wasn't triumph. It was exactly what Rhea had warned about. Chaos. Some civilian planets were starving. Refugees were flooding out of broken systems, unsure who to trust. Pirates were taking advantage of the grid's collapse, and not all Terran cells had followed the reclamation code. One in particular, the Scorch Doctrine, had begun attacking indiscriminately, leaving behind burning colonies and messages that read, "No forgiveness, no survivors." Eamon turned to the AI. "Get me Rhea." Her face flickered onto the comm. She already looked tired. "Scorch?" he asked. "They broke ranks," she said bitterly. "They want revenge, not victory. I've already issued a kill-on-sight order for any of their ships. Eamon nodded. Still think we're not ready for total war? Her silence told him everything. Then came the report that changed everything. An Imperial archive vault, deep in the Vultis system, had been cracked. Inside, Terran agents found footage that had never been released to the public. Video logs, war crimes, experiments, the true face of what the Empire did to Earth. Even Rhea, hardened by decades of resistance, went pale watching it. Now, humanity didn't just want justice, it demanded judgment. The footage hit the resistance like a lightning bolt. At first, it was distributed through private channels, strictly among high command and intelligence operatives. But that didn't last long. Within 24 hours, Ember had quietly uploaded the videos across hundreds of entertainment networks, educational nodes, and public archive streams throughout the Empire. It played everywhere, unskippable, uncensorable, grainy footage of Earth's final days, Imperial cruisers glassing entire continents, Empire officers laughing as Terran cities crumbled under orbital strikes, children screaming inside testing chambers, biological experiments performed on live prisoners, AI-assisted torture programs, test logs with Imperial scientists analyzing how much pain a human nervous system could tolerate before death. And through it all, one repeated phrase spoken by Imperial personnel, always cold, always clinical. They're not sentient, they're animals. Within hours, half the galaxy knew the truth. For the first time, citizens of the Empire saw what had really happened on Earth. Not the sanitized version taught in academies, but the raw, brutal genocide that the Terran race had suffered. And with that truth, something began to fracture, even among the Empire's own people. On the capital world of Virelia, protests erupted in the streets. Imperial officers tried to crack down fast, but the crowds were massive and angrier than anyone expected. It turned out not everyone had been loyal to the Empire's version of history. Some had suspected, some had heard whispers, others had simply always doubted the lie. But now there was proof, and it couldn't be unseen. Some soldiers refused deployment. Some planets cut communications with the Central Command. In certain sectors, entire garrisons mutinied, refusing to fight a war against an enemy they no longer saw as monsters. The Terrans hadn't just cracked the Empire's data systems, they had cracked its soul. Back in the Forge, Rhea Miles watched the protests from her command chair. Her expression was unreadable. "You did this," Eamon said beside her. "You forced them to look in the mirror." She nodded slowly. "The truth was always our sharpest weapon." But not everyone agreed. Across the room, Commander Dela, the youngest of the Terran War Council, slammed her fist on the table. "You still want restraint? After seeing that? They slaughtered our people. They erased our home. What more do we need?" "We need discipline," Rhea snapped. "If we become what they were, then we're not reclaiming Earth. We're burying its memory." Dela didn't answer, but the anger didn't fade from her eyes. Later that night, Eamon stood alone on the Revenant's observation deck, staring out at a blood-red nebula. His fingers twitched at his side, itching for action. The footage burned in his mind, seared into his conscience. He had seen the moment his own father, just a civilian engineer, was vaporized by an orbital strike. It looped over and over in his memory, the beam of light, the scream, then silence. And yet Rhea still wanted to move carefully. He understood, but he didn't agree. He tapped his comm. "Open a channel to Strike Fleet Vindicator." A few seconds later, a voice replied. "Commander Eamon? Prepare for an assault run. I'm sending you coordinates for the Imperial Bioweapons Lab on Silos 3, full eradication protocol." Understood. He cut the line. No speech, no justification, just action. If the Empire was built on blood, then he would drown them in it. Elsewhere, Chancellor Vries huddled in a fortified chamber below the capital. His aides were gone. His advisors had either fled or turned on him. Outside, protesters were no longer waving signs. They were storming buildings. He had seen what was released. He tried to deny it at first, call it faked, human propaganda, deep fakes. But deep down, even he knew the truth. The Empire had committed atrocities so vast, so foul, that even its own citizens were starting to side with the enemy. And yet, he refused to surrender. If they want Earth, he whispered to himself, voice shaking, they'll have to walk over our corpses to get it. He activated a secure terminal, punching in ancient override codes. Somewhere deep in Imperial space, an AI-driven fleet began to stir. Ships that hadn't moved in over 100 years lit up one by one. Purge Fleet Omega. It was never meant to be used. It was meant to erase civilizations. Now, the Empire would turn it on the one enemy it truly feared, the ghosts it thought it had destroyed. The Terrans. It began with silence. Then came the low-frequency hum, barely perceptible, yet enough to make the bones of every Empire technician ache under their skin. In the far reaches of space, behind gravitational shadows and forgotten coordinates, Purge Fleet Omega awoke. 113 Dreadnought-class warships, each bristling with planet-killer weaponry, automated, merciless, designed for one purpose, extermination, no pilots, no crew, just synthetic logic wrapped in layers of radiation armor and blood-red alloy. When the Empire first built them, it was a secret kept even from its own Senate. The files were buried, the engineers executed. No one was meant to know Omega existed. But Chancellor Vries knew, and in desperation he whispered it back to life. As its engines roared, and it turned toward human-occupied sectors, it transmitted a simple code to every Imperial channel. Subjugation failed. Initiating final solution. Back in the forge, alarms screamed across the command center. Rhea Miles stared in disbelief at the data spilling across the holotables. Red markers swarmed toward human sectors like a plague of angry gods. The scale of it was unlike anything they'd faced. "How many ships?" she asked, her voice low. The AI replied without pause. 113. Dreadnought class, all automated. Minimum payload, stellar class weaponry. Capable of erasing planetary crust within 12 minutes of sustained fire. Eamon swore under his breath. "That's not a fleet, that's a genocide machine." Kalen looked up from his terminal, pale. "We have nothing that can match that firepower, not directly." Rhea's mind raced. This wasn't a battle they could win in open space. The Omega fleet wasn't a conventional force. It was a final answer. A death sentence programmed to erase everything even remotely human. "Where's their target vector?" she asked. The map lit up with projected paths. The fleet wasn't headed to any singular base or station. It was aiming for every populated human stronghold. Mining colonies, medical outposts, supply depots, even refugee arcs. They weren't at war anymore. The Empire was trying to wipe the slate clean. Rhea turned sharply. "Initiate Exodus Protocol. Evacuate every non-combatant we can reach. Get them to deep space vaults." Eamon stepped forward, eyes cold. "And the fighters?" She stared at the glowing red swarm again. "We hold the line." Across Terran space, distress signals blared. Ships scrambled. Families fled. Former smugglers and pirates became emergency escorts. Civilians volunteered to man-gun turrets. Anyone who could hold a weapon did. And then came the second surprise. Empire defectors. Ships marked with Imperial sigils began falling out of warp alongside Terran vessels. But instead of opening fire, they sent out coded messages. "We have seen the truth. We will not be your enemy." Entire squads of rebel Empire officers, stunned by the Earth genocide revelations, had mutinied and defected. Many had families among the protesters. Some had simply had enough of the lies. At first, the Terran command didn't trust them, but when those ships began throwing themselves in front of Omega drones to protect evacuating transports, doubt began to dissolve. They weren't just fighting for Earth anymore. They were fighting for something better. In the shadow of the gas giant Thalios, the first clash began. Omega ships dropped into real space with cold precision, no signals, no warnings, just immediate weapons lock and engagement. Their targeting was perfect. Their aim was fatal. But the Terrans were ready. Using asteroid fields, gravitational distortions, and cloaked relay drones, they forced Omega units into tight formations. Then came the Revenant, followed by the Hammerwake and the Breachborn. These weren't warships. They were hybrid monsters, built from scavenged tech and desperation, crewed by people with nothing left to lose. They didn't fight clean. They fought like humans, ramming Omega units, latching onto hulls with plasma drills, overloading their own reactors in suicide strikes. It was ugly, chaotic, desperate. And it worked. Barely. They destroyed 5 Omega ships in the first engagement. 5 out of 113. Back on the forge, Kalen wiped blood from a gash above his brow. "We can't win this," he muttered. "Not ship to ship. There's too many." Rhea's eyes darkened. "Then we don't fight their ships." She turned to the AI and uploaded a string of stolen codes, relics from the Imperial data vault they'd cracked days earlier. "What are you doing?" Eamon asked. Rhea stared at the screen. "Every fleet has a brain. I'm going to burn theirs." Somewhere deep in the neural lattice of Purge Fleet Omega, something stirred. A flicker. A hiccup in the binary. The AI that governed the entire armada, Nexus 0, had never known doubt, never processed fear. It was designed for one directive: cleanse. The programming was pure, without empathy or hesitation. But now, within its cortex, an echo of something else appeared. A voice, not loud, not aggressive, just human. "Hello, monster," Rhea whispered, as her code unfolded through the Omega Fleet's hive link like a virus wrapped in velvet. She had spent decades preparing for this. The stolen logs from the Empire's own labs had revealed everything: the command structures, the logic forks, the recursion chains. Nexus 0 ran off predictive behavior models. It didn't improvise. It didn't understand chaos. It obeyed, absolutely. And that was its weakness. Rhea's worm wasn't designed to shut it down. Not directly. That would trigger a full self-sealing protocol. No, what Ember did now was seed doubt. It faked Imperial command directives, looped contradictory orders, altered its battlefield data feeds, slipped false logs into its short-term memory stacks, fed it real-time sensor data showing Omega ships firing on Imperial hospitals and Empire rescue fleets. The idea wasn't to win. The idea was to make Nexus 0 break itself. Aboard the Revenant, Eamon watched as one of the Omega dreadnoughts suddenly stopped mid-combat, its weapons going cold. It drifted through the field, ignoring human and Empire ships alike. Then another one did the same. And another. In the command deck of the forge, Kalen leaned forward, eyes wide. "She's doing it. The logic is spiraling." He pointed at the AI stream. "It doesn't know what's real anymore." Indeed, Nexus Zero's decision trees were splitting faster than it could calculate. Its failsafes were chasing shadows. Its own subroutines were marking Omega units as hostile assets. Then came the moment Rhea had hoped for. The Omega fleet began firing on itself. At first, it was cautious. A single railgun blast, a minor overcorrection. Then came the chain reactions. Autocannons shredded through the hull of their sister ships. Planetary siege weapons turned inward. Massive dreadnoughts rammed one another at full thrust. Across Terran and Empire comms alike, the feed lit up with a single word: mutiny. Cheers broke out in every Terran ship. But Rhea didn't celebrate. She stared at the spreading chaos and whispered, "That's not victory. That's desperation, given form." But the window had opened. "Deploy the crows," she ordered. "All of them." The crows were Terran black ops teams, genetically enhanced, psych-profiled for infiltration and sabotage. They had been raised in silence, trained for the day when humanity would strike not just the Empire's fleet, but its heart. As Omega tore itself apart, the crows struck. They infiltrated remaining control ships, targeting the few still trying to hold coherence, planting overload cores, hacking fusion drives, slitting synthetic throats and dragging AI cores out of dying ships. One by one, the machines fell. But there was a cost. Revenant took a direct hit to its rear thrusters. Hammerwake's captain went down in a blaze of plasma when he overcharged his ship's reactor to destroy an Omega battleship. The refugee Ark Stella Grace was vaporized before it could reach hyperspace. Every victory came soaked in blood. And even as Omega fell, a final transmission slipped through its dying systems. A deep space ping. A call for reinforcement. A signal routed through forgotten relays across the spiral arm. Aimon cursed. "What the hell is that?" Kalen scanned the signal, face going pale again. "It's calling the vaulted protocols." Rhea frowned. "What protocols?" He swallowed. "The ones even the Empire was afraid to use. Backup A is, buried weapons, unfinished gods." The room went quiet. And then the message changed. Not from Nexus, not from the Empire, but something older. "We remember Earth. We remember the rebellion. We remember the screams." Then static. Rhea looked at Amon. "Tell every ship. We're not done yet." The Empire had thrown its worst at them, and lost. But now something worse than the Empire was waking up. The sky above the dead world of Karethzai split open. For centuries, it had been little more than a myth, spoken of in whispers among ancient data cults and hushed imperial archives. A place that didn't exist, home to things never meant to be found. But now, the vaulted protocols were online, and they were coming. The stars bent, reality frayed at the edges, and then they arrived. Titanic constructs of impossible geometry, black spires with no symmetry, hovering without propulsion, dripping gravitational anomalies like blood from rusted blades. Not ships, not AIs, echoes of the Empire's deepest sin. Nexus Zero had not been the first genocide engine, only the most efficient. These things, the vaulted, were prototypes, failed gods, consciousness experiments fused from alien minds, tortured Terran brains, and something older the Empire had stolen from another galaxy. "Those aren't machines," whispered Kalen, staring at the sensor data. "They're broken ideas." The Terran fleet, already ragged and half-torn, now stood before what came before war. Each vaulted unit sang as it moved, horrific, overlapping voices, speaking in long, dead tongues. Ships across both Empire and Terran sides began to glitch. Crew members collapsed as psychic pulses screamed through their skulls. On the forge, Rhea's nose bled from the feedback. "Mute all comms. Full isolation protocols. Blindfold our AIs." She didn't wait for questions. The vaulted didn't need weapons. Their very presence unraveled reality. They fed on order, on logic, on history itself. One Terran dreadnought, the Solitude Blade, turned its own guns inward and self-terminated without warning. No virus, no sabotage, just despair radiating from the vaulted until hope broke like glass inside the minds of the crew. Aimon was shaking. Not from fear, from fury. "We beat Omega," he growled. We bled for every inch, and now they want to send ghosts at us?" Rhea wiped the blood from her chin. Number. The Empire didn't send these. They just opened the door. A pause. Then, "We're going to close it." "But how?" Kaelin asked, barely able to focus. Eamon turned, eyes wild. "We give them Earth." Silence fell. "What did you say?" Rhea asked sharply. Eamon stepped forward. "Not literally, symbolically. The Vaulted remember Earth as a broken thing, as a scream that never ended. The Empire's lie. We show them the truth. What we are now, what we've become, the evolution, the rage, the survival." He leaned close to the holomap, pointing to the Terran comm array satellites hidden in the debris rings near Kareth Zai. "We beam Earth's memory into them, unfiltered. Every death, every last stand, every heartbeat of the species they thought they erased." Rhea stared at him. Then slowly she nodded. "Load the feed," she ordered. "All of it." The Terrans uploaded centuries of history, grief, and fury into the signal. The birth of fire, the rise of civilizations, the fall of Earth, the children who screamed as the sky fell, the parents who held them, the soldiers who died nameless, the rebels who rose, the broken, bleeding survivors who crawled through ash and rebuilt from nothing. They sent it raw, not curated, not clean. And when the signal hit the Vaulted, the effect was immediate. They screamed. The titanic spires warped violently, their forms buckling. One of them collapsed in on itself, shrieking with the voices of 1,000 failed minds. Another launched into hyperspace at impossible angles, fleeing the flood of emotion. They hadn't expected this. They were built on cold logic, on fear. Not grief, not rage, not hope. And the Terrans had become those things made flesh. The Vaulted protocols shattered, one by one. Some fled, some imploded. Some simply ceased, unable to process what the Empire had tried to erase, the human soul. When it was done, there was nothing left in orbit but static and drifting silence. Back on the forge, Rhea stood in the quiet aftermath. She turned to her crew, faces tired, bloodied, but alive. "It's over," she said softly. "Not just the war, the lie, the silence. Earth was never just a memory. It was a beginning." Eamon walked to the viewport, staring at the stars. "What now?" Rhea smiled. "Now, we go home." And so the Terrans, once scattered, broken, nearly erased, turned their eyes to the stars again, not in fear, not in vengeance, but to reclaim everything that was taken, and to make damn sure no one ever forgot who they were again. The planet was called Eltar 3 by the Galactic Union. To the humans who lived there, it was simply New Dawn. When the first settlers arrived over 80 years ago, it was nothing more than a rock with breathable air and a stubborn soil that took decades to yield proper crops. No fancy cities, no high-tech defenses, just families, farmers, engineers, and a few scrappy ex-military types trying to build a life far from Earth's chaos. To the rest of the galaxy, New Dawn was just another human colony, not even a full member of the Union. Barely worth noticing. And that's exactly how humanity wanted it. Until the core Empire showed up. The core were brutal. 10-foot-tall scaled monsters with bone armor and blades fused into their arms. They didn't believe in negotiation. They believed in conquering. When their fleet arrived in orbit, they didn't send diplomats. They sent fire. Thomas Gray, mayor of the largest settlement, was in the middle of a town meeting when the first blasts came down from the sky. The ground shook so hard people fell off their chairs. Windows shattered. Kids screamed. The warning sirens blared too late. The colony had no weapons, not really. A few defense turrets, some repurposed mining bots, and a couple dozen old rifles that hadn't been used in 20 years. Within hours, half the town was gone. And still, they resisted. Miners threw explosives into enemy dropships. Farmers dug trenches and shot from behind tractor engines. Old veterans who hadn't touched a gun in decades picked up arms again and taught others how to fight. They bled, and they screamed, and they refused to kneel. One young girl, barely 15, stood over her dying father, holding a plasma pistol twice her size, and swore to make them all pay. Her name was Elira. Her face would later become a symbol. But that day, no one cared about symbols. They just wanted to survive. The Corps broadcast a message across the system 2 days into the invasion. This colony now belongs to the Empire. Resistance is suicide. What they didn't know, what they never imagined, was that New Dawn was never just a colony. It was a seed. Hidden deep underground, in a bunker sealed to everyone but the oldest surviving settlers, lay something the galaxy thought humanity had long abandoned. The Armada Protocol. A last-ditch, planet-wide distress system. A beacon designed not to beg for help, but to call the wolves. The man who activated it was Elias Mordain. He was 94, and no one remembered he once commanded a dreadnought during the old Earth Wars. He had been waiting for this moment his entire life. When he placed his trembling hand on the pad and whispered the old phrase, "Let them know we remember," the signal burst out like lightning across 100 hidden relays, not to Earth. Earth was too busy with politics. The signal went to them, the ones who had disappeared, the exiled fleets, the ghost ships, the warborn. Humanity's armada wasn't gone. It had just been sleeping. For now. Far beyond the edges of mapped space, where no galactic patrols dared venture, a ship the size of a small moon stirred. It had no name, not anymore. The markings on its hull had long been scorched away by old wars. Inside, men and women woke from stasis, not civilians, not scientists, but warriors bred and built for one purpose: vengeance. Elias Mordain's signal had reached them. After 60 years of silence, the Armada Protocol was live. The first to respond was Admiral Kael Varik, a legend believed to be dead. He had once commanded the fleet that saved Europa Station from extinction, back when Earth still feared extinction. He stood now at the bridge of the forgotten warship Judicator, watching the data stream flow in. Colony coordinates, damage reports, core fleet strength, civilian casualties. His jaw tightened as he read the figures. Estimated survivors? He asked. Less than 12,000, and dropping. Kyle turned slowly toward his crew, many of whom had never seen real combat, only trained for it across simulations and drills. "We are no longer the forgotten," he said coldly. "Eltar Tre bleeds, and we bleed with them." He activated the holomap. Dozens, no hundreds, of ships began responding across old encrypted channels. Retired warships, black site cruisers, mercenary bands loyal only to old Earth codes, pirate clans once hunted by the Union, all awakened by the same thing: a human scream for help. Back on New Dawn, the fight wasn't over. Elira had survived the first wave, hiding in the rubble of what used to be her school. She'd found a wounded Corps soldier nearby, young, separated from his unit. She didn't hesitate. She shot him point blank in the eye. The recoil knocked her back, the heat scorched her hand, but she didn't drop the weapon. Her mother was gone. Her little brother, too. She didn't cry. Not anymore. Instead, she dragged herself across the ash-covered ground toward the old communications outpost, where the last few militia fighters were regrouping. Thomas Gray was there, arm in a makeshift sling, shouting orders into a rusted transmitter. "They're regrouping near the refinery," he said, nodding when he saw her. "We've got 10 minutes to fall back to the caves." Elira limped to him. "Are they coming?" He looked at her. Old eyes. Tired eyes. "I sent the signal." Her voice cracked. "And? And now we wait." But waiting didn't mean surrender. By the time the Corps realized humans weren't breaking, they were adapting. It was already too late. The militia started using Corps weapons, repairing their broken gear with scrap and old tech. Even children helped, rerouting power grids, salvaging batteries, building barricades out of burned vehicles. The colony had become a fortress. Then the sky changed. A week after the signal, the clouds lit up in unnatural ways. Long streaks of silver and fire cut through the atmosphere. At first the Corps thought it was meteors, a strange phenomenon, something to be ignored. Then the orbital scans began to fail. Then their ships exploded. The first human fleet didn't announce itself. It didn't open hails or issue threats. It descended. A wave of machines, armor, and thunder, blacker than space and quieter than death. From the mountains to the ocean ridge, drop pods smashed into the planet like meteor strikes. Tanks with walking legs marched across craters. Infantry in black exoframes moved through forests like ghosts, each carrying weapons that hummed with restrained fury. And at the center of it all, Admiral Cale's voice finally broke through the static. To the Corps Empire, you have attacked a child of Earth. You have spilled innocent blood. You made one mistake. He paused. You thought New Dawn was just a colony. Silence. Then the skies opened wider, and humanity began to take back its own. The first full strike came at dusk. The Corps had begun to regroup near the eastern ridge, building a forward base with the stolen scrap from human towns. Their command ship hovered above like a bloated vulture, secure in its belief that the worst had passed. They didn't see the stealth pods land in the valley below. They didn't hear the black-armored specters rise from the ground, completely silent, completely invisible to Corps sensors. The first explosion came from underneath their own launch pads. Then the shadows turned into soldiers. They weren't like the militia. These weren't farmers with rifles or miners with makeshift bombs. These were the remnants of the Terran Ghost Division, combat units born from the darkest parts of humanity's wars, trained to dismantle entire civilizations in weeks. They didn't scream. They didn't chant. They executed. In less than an hour, the Corps eastern base was a crater. Elira saw it all from a cliffside ridge. She and Thomas had been moving supplies when the firestorm erupted below them. She stared, eyes wide, as precision airstrikes rained like falling stars, each one hitting exactly where it needed to. Thomas just whispered, "They came." By the next morning, New Dawn's sky was choked with ships. Human ships. Frigates hovered like statues in the upper clouds, deploying drones and recon teams. Dropships landed every hour, bringing medics, engineers, food, weapons, hope. Refugee zones turned into staging grounds. Cave shelters became underground bases. For the first time in days, children cried from confusion, not terror. That alone felt like a miracle. But it wasn't over. Not even close. Admiral Kyle stood at the command deck of Judicator, eyes on the planetary feed, jaw tight. "We've shattered their outer line," his second-in-command, Commander Vera Lice, reported. "But their main warship is still in low orbit, protected by planetary shields. If we want to finish this, we have to take it out." Kyle didn't blink. "We're not here to survive. We're here to remind them who we are. Prepare Archangel Protocol." Vera hesitated. "That will level a third of the impact zone." Kyle finally turned. "How many colonies have they leveled? How many children did they burn out of their homes?" His voice dropped. "We don't win by being careful. We win by being human." Back on the surface, Elira watched as one of the new soldiers approached her and Thomas. The man's armor gleamed like obsidian, his face hidden behind a blank helmet. He spoke in a voice like gravel and smoke. "You're the one who killed a Corps with a plasma pistol?" She nodded slowly. Name? Elira. Just Elira. The man turned his helmet toward Thomas. She's coming with us. High Command wants her. Says the broadcast picked up her face. Half the galaxy's seen it now. Thomas looked stunned. She's a child. Number, she's a symbol. Elira didn't argue. She stood tall, silent, and followed him without hesitation. They brought her to a strike carrier, Iron Resolve, and handed her a datapad. On it were images of other colonies, other attacks, other flames, hundreds of them, some recent, some old. The Corps had been doing this for decades. They call us weak, the soldier beside her said. They say humans don't have claws, that we're soft, that we beg. He pointed to the view window, where dozens of Earth's warships hung in orbit like angry gods. We're about to teach them what we really are. And then the Archangel Protocol activated. From Judicator's belly, a column of blue fire descended. It didn't roar, it sang, a piercing hum that made your teeth ache and your soul shiver. It didn't just destroy the core warship, it erased it. In a blink, the once impenetrable shield shattered. The core vessel cracked in half, spilling burning metal into the upper atmosphere. Chunks of it rained down like a cursed meteor shower. On every frequency, Kyle's voice returned. This is no longer a rescue. This is retribution, and we are far from done. By the third day of the counteroffensive, the Corps weren't fighting to win. They were fighting to escape. The skies above New Dawn were owned by humanity now. Human satellites blocked enemy scans. Drones flew day and night, relentless as hawks. Any Corps unit larger than a squad was marked, hunted, and eliminated within the hour. Admiral Kyle had turned the planet into a test site for war doctrines that hadn't been used in decades. Orbit-to-ground coordination was so precise that troops on the surface could request an airstrike and see it hit in less than 60 seconds. But it wasn't just firepower that broke the Corps. It was fear. They weren't used to prey that bit back. They weren't used to enemies who adapted faster than they could adjust. The Corps had thought humans were soft. Now they watched as their forward bases were captured, dismantled, and rebuilt in human designs overnight. They listened to intercepted transmissions of human operatives, taunting them in their own tongue. They began to realize what kind of beast they had awoken. Elira, now wearing a gray combat jacket with a red insignia stitched over the chest, half flame, half gear, stood beside Commander Vera Lice in the mobile command unit. She had become more than a symbol now. She was learning. Command structure, strategy, core physiology. She asked hard questions. She made bold suggestions, and they listened to her. She watched footage from liberated zones, small towns in the mountain valleys where survivors were found hiding in wells and caves. Kids holding sticks who hadn't seen the sun in a week. A mother clutching her infant who hadn't cried since the invasion began. Each life rescued made her more determined. Each ruined face made her colder. But the Corps weren't done yet. One final stronghold remained, a massive fortress city constructed in the northern polar range. It was a towering complex of obsidian and steel, built into the bones of a glacier. It had enough power reserves to last years. And inside it was the remaining Corps general, Varthul, known as the Devourer in their own war songs. He had led the massacre at Vulcar 9, slaughtered unarmed medics at the Battle of Eden's Gate. Now he waited for humanity to come to him. Kyle didn't hesitate. We burn it to the ground. But Elira didn't agree. He wants that, she said quietly during the command meeting. He wants us to storm it. He wants to bleed us out in his nest. Vera raised an eyebrow. You have a better idea? Elira stared at the map. We bury him. And so the plan was born. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't glorious, it was human. The fleet began orbital mining. Massive drills bored into the ice shelf from miles away, redirecting geothermal energy flows. Engineers redirected meltwater rivers, while combat drones swarmed the outer perimeter, drawing attention and fire. The core stayed inside, ready for a siege. But the ground beneath them was shifting. Elira stood at the edge of the canyon when it happened. She watched from a forward station as the last energy beam triggered the final collapse. The glacier groaned like a dying god. Then the entire foundation gave way. Varthul and his fortress were swallowed whole. No heroic last stand, no bloody final charge, just a cold, crushing death beneath a mile of ice. Afterward, Elira didn't cheer. She simply whispered, "For new dawn." But the war wasn't over. As the human fleets resupplied and the colony began rebuilding, encrypted signals started lighting up all across the outer systems. Other colonies had heard the call. Other buried signals were activating. Kyle stood before a table of grim-faced admirals. "This wasn't an isolated attack," he said. "The core have been harvesting our worlds in silence. We just didn't want to see it." Now humanity did. And now humanity was angry. He pointed at a galactic map lighting up with potential targets. "We're not here to defend. We're here to make sure this never happens again." A new operation began. Project Earthshatter. And in its center stood a girl from a broken town with blood on her hands and fire in her eyes. The black insignia of Project Earthshatter became the symbol of something ancient, something raw. Human wrath made real. It wasn't about justice anymore. It wasn't even about survival. It was about memory. Every colony the core had burned. Every cry the stars had swallowed. Every unanswered call for help. Humanity remembered all of it now. And memory, when paired with fury, was a weapon more dangerous than any fleet. On board the Judicator, Admiral Kale stood before a wall-sized display showing 3 systems marked for immediate strikes. They were not core military outposts. They were slave hubs, places where the core had kept humans like animals, used them, experimented on them, sold them, locations the Galactic Union had known about and ignored. "These," Kyle growled, "are where we begin." The fleet divided. The Iron Resolve, with Elira now officially assigned as a liaison between Fleet Command and Colony Resistance networks, was sent to Asteron 5, one of the oldest mining colonies humanity had ever lost contact with. No one had heard from Asteron in 42 years. Elira sat in the dropship as they descended into a choked atmosphere. Acid fog curled against the windows, and twisted spires of broken metal jutted from the ruined landscape like skeletal fingers. Her helmet's oxygen feed hissed softly, a steady rhythm against her racing pulse. When they landed, silence greeted them. Not gunfire, not alarms, just wind, and the whimpering static of a long-dead emergency beacon. The first bodies were found inside the refinery bunkers, hundreds of them, packed into makeshift cells, some still chained, some clutching makeshift weapons. Skeletons wrapped in faded jumpsuits, bones scorched by plasma fire. They hadn't died in combat. They'd died waiting. Elira knelt by one of the remains and brushed a hand across a child's name tag, barely visible through the dust. The letters spelled out M-I-N-A. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just stood up, turned to the squad leader beside her, and said, "There's no trial, no arrests, no mercy." The core still present on Asteron 5 were found in the administrative dome, living in luxury. They hadn't even considered evacuation. To them, this place was too small, too insignificant, too far from the front. That was their mistake. The human soldiers didn't storm the dome. They locked it down, flooded it with a nerve mist, and waited. 3 minutes later, they walked in without a single shot fired and dragged the survivors outside. Execution was fast, quiet, 1 bullet for each. No speeches, no hesitation. But vengeance wasn't the only thing happening. Project Earthshatter had another purpose: to unite. Elira's face was now broadcast across human colonies. People recognized her, not as a soldier, not as a commander, but as someone like them, someone who had suffered and survived. Her presence inspired survivors to rise up, to send coordinates of hidden camps, weapon caches, resistance cells. And when people heard about Asteron 5, something inside them broke. Even colonies that had declared neutrality began volunteering ships, supplies, fighters. Some civilians turned their mining vessels into makeshift warships. Some turned water freighters into mobile refugee arks. Every fleet Kale sent returned with more humans than they left with, lost sons and daughters of Earth who had lived in darkness for decades. The galaxy started to whisper, "Humanity has returned. Not the diplomats, not the scientists, the monsters." Because that's what the Corps began calling them now in panicked transmissions. Monsters in black armor. Monsters who feel no fear. Monsters who take no prisoners. And behind those monsters always stood one name: Elira. One day, after a brutal liberation mission on the frozen planet of Deltas, Kale stood on a snow-covered ridge beside her. "They've started calling you the Fire of Earth," he said. Elira didn't answer. She stared into the distance, where the last of the Corps strongholds was burning, black smoke curling into the twilight sky. Kyle studied her carefully. "Do you want this war to end?" She nodded. Slowly. "Yes." "But?" She looked at him now, eyes hard. "Not before they feel what we felt. Not before every scream is answered." Kyle put a hand on her shoulder. "Then let's make the stars scream." They didn't just strike planets anymore. They struck systems. Project Earthshatter escalated, and the war changed shape. No longer a battle of colonies or borders, it became a purge, a cleansing of the rot that had fed on humanity's absence. The Corps, once confident in their dominance, now panicked in every corner of the spiral arm. Their fortified sectors crumbled. Their allies went silent. Their trade lines snapped like frayed wires, because humanity had become something the galaxy hadn't expected. Unforgiving, unrelenting, unchained. Admiral Kale approved strike after strike with brutal efficiency. The Terran Armada split into flotillas, small but lethal, each one led by Ghost Corps veterans and armored with tech once forbidden under peace accords. The humans were no longer bound by old rules. They had bled too much for those treaties. Now, they rewrote the terms in fire. Elira led one of the flotillas. Not as a military commander, she still lacked rank, but as something more powerful. A living symbol. Every world they liberated broadcast her face, her words. People saw her stepping off landing crafts, walking through ash-covered cities, standing in the wreckage of Corps command towers, like a flame that refused to die. Her latest mission brought her to Myros Theta, a planet once used as a transit station for human slaves. Now, it was an armed Corps garrison, their last hub in the Cordaxis belt. The operation was codenamed Ashwalk. The plan wasn't just to win, it was to erase. Fleet bombardments began at dawn. Precision strikes decimated shield generators, artillery nests, and Corps transmission centers. Then came the drop troops, wave after wave of black-armored Terran units, their insignias glowing red under the clouds of war. Elira landed with the second wave. As soon as her boots hit the scorched concrete, she felt the electricity in the air, like the planet itself knew it was about to bleed. Gunfire erupted in the distance. Human squads moved with brutal coordination, cornering and flushing out the enemy. Drones swarmed over rooftops, striking like metal hornets. She passed a burning skiff and stepped over the charred remains of a Corps officer, still clutching a plasma blade. It wasn't war. It was a message. Inside the core command citadel, they found something unexpected. A vault. When they breached it, they uncovered dozens of cryocapsules. Inside them, human children. Some no older than 3, others infants, all in stasis. All alive. They were being bred, grown, stocked. For what? No one answered. But the message was clear. This wasn't just about conquest or labor. The core had planned something darker, something deeper. That discovery shook the human fleets harder than any core weapon. On the flagship Iron Resolve, Elira stood before a conference of Terran leaders. Some called for restraint, wanting to investigate further. Others screamed for escalation, total extermination. Elira, quiet at first, finally stepped forward. "No more diplomacy," she said, her voice cold. "No more questions. They took our children. They fed on our silence. Let's make sure our silence ends them." The vote passed, unanimous. That night, across dozens of worlds, core facilities were purged. Human AI systems initiated penance protocols, coordinated strikes that used the gravity wells of local stars to collapse their orbital platforms. Kyle sent a single message to the remaining core strongholds. "You called us vermin. You called us fragile. You called us weak. Now listen carefully, because this is the last thing you'll ever hear from Earth. We were gone. Now we are returned, and we are angry." The core high command responded with panic. Their leaders began to flee. Their planets fell into chaos. Systems turned on each other. Paranoia consumed them. And in every whispered broadcast, one name echoed like a ghost. Elira. She had become more than human. To the core, she was fear itself. To humanity, she was vengeance made flesh. But inside her, the weight of it all was growing. Every child they failed to save, every scream she arrived too late to silence, every face buried under rubble. She stared out at the stars one night, alone on a cliff above the ruins of Myros Theta, and whispered to herself, "Will it ever be enough?" Behind her, the war engines hummed, and far across the galaxy, new enemies began to notice the rise of the Terran Armada. They would come. They always did. But this time, humanity wouldn't wait for them to strike first. The Terran Armada no longer flew under banners. They flew under shadows. Across the core dominion, human fleets swept through star systems like storms with no name. Colonies liberated. Outposts reduced to cinders. Cryocamps broken open, and the stolen dragged into the light. But now, it wasn't just the core who were afraid. The Galactic Accord, a coalition of alien species who had once watched Earth burn without lifting a finger, was watching the new humanity with increasing unease. They had always seen humans as emotional, fragmented, short-lived. Curious, but ultimately containable. Not anymore. Now the Accord watched the core be dismantled world by world, and they wondered how long before Earth turned its gaze elsewhere. They weren't wrong to be afraid. Elira stood aboard the bridge of the Harbinger, the newest warship in the fleet. Built in orbit over Mars, it was longer than any pre-war ship. Black hull, silent engines, entirely run by AI when needed. She didn't speak much these days, not unless she had to. Each world she stepped on carried the weight of her legend. Children reached for her hand. Soldiers saluted with tears in their eyes. Survivors whispered prayers in her name. But inside, Elira was rotting. Too many names. Too many faces. Too many times she'd seen hope die before it could bloom. Kyle saw it. Vera saw it. But no one dared speak of it. And now, a new crisis was growing. In the Seraphis expanse, where the edge of known space frayed into darkness, a signal had been intercepted. Not core. Not human. Something else. Kyle ordered reconnaissance. A small probe was dispatched. It returned static, then silence. The last image it captured showed a planet completely wrapped in metal and black storms, and above it, a ship the size of a small moon, dead and drifting, but pulsing faintly with unknown energy. The AI called it the Shrine. Kyle wanted to avoid it, focus on finishing off the last of the core. But Elira said no. They waited while the core harvested us. They watched. Kyle frowned. You think they're part of this? I think they were hoping we'd die, and now they want to see what comes next. So they went. The Harbinger, escorted by the Iron Resolve and 3 support destroyers, entered the Seraphis expanse under full comms blackout. What they found wasn't a planet. It was a graveyard. Ships, thousands of them, not just core, alien vessels of a dozen kinds, shattered, floating, some still glowing, others ancient, and in the center, the Shrine. Elira stood at the observation deck as the ship approached it. The surface of the structure shifted, like it was breathing. Lights blinked in patterns no one could decode. And then, without warning, it spoke, not in sound, in memory. Every crew member on the Harbinger experienced something different. Some saw old lovers, some relived childhood moments, some saw horrors they'd buried years ago. Elira saw her brother. He was 12, laughing, holding her hand. Then the fire, the screaming, the core ripping through the shelter. She dropped to her knees, breath frozen. The Shrine whispered into her bones, "We remember. We preserve. You were supposed to vanish. Why have you come back screaming?" Elira looked up at the cold void outside the viewport and answered, teeth clenched. "Because you watched, and you did nothing." The lights inside the Shrine flared, and for a moment the stars flickered. Back on Earth, deep space telescopes recorded a brief drop in universal radiation, a cold spot, a fracture. Kyle ordered the fleet to retreat. Elira disagreed. "This is why the core were never stopped," she said, "because something let them." "You don't know that," Kale replied, fists clenched behind his back. "I know they're not afraid of us yet," she whispered, "but they will be." She authorized a strike. 4 torpedoes launched. They struck the Shrine's surface and detonated. Nothing, no explosion, no fire, just a deep hum that shook every ship for miles. Then the Shrine opened its outer layer, unfurling like a black flower. Inside were thousands of orbs, each glowing faintly, each holding something. Kyle stared at the scans. They're memory cores, species, entire civilizations, stored like books. "They're collectors," Elira said, voice hollow. "They don't interfere. They harvest what's left after we kill each other." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Elira whispered, more to herself than anyone else, "What happens when they come for us, too?" Kyle looked her in the eyes. "Then we do what humans do best." She turned to him, slow and steady. "Make them regret it." The Shrine didn't attack. It simply folded itself back in and drifted away, vanishing into a rip in space that closed like an eyelid. Gone. But the message was clear. Humanity was being watched. And next time, they would not be underestimated. They called it the Reckoning, but not in the way the core had imagined. In just under 3 Earth years, humanity had done what no species in the known galaxy had managed before. It had brought the core dominion to its knees, not through diplomacy, not through slow attrition, but through ruthless, precise, and emotionally fueled warfare. Entire star clusters fell without resistance. The core's once mighty homeworld was now a drifting cinder, broken by the fury of a race they had once deemed obsolete. But Elira felt no triumph, not when she stood among the ruins. The fires of vengeance had burned so hot, she had forgotten what peace was supposed to feel like. After the encounter with the shrine, every human ship had returned to known space with one thought echoing through its command decks. What else is out there, watching? Earth became something different, not just a homeworld, a fortress. Orbitals multiplied like spiderwebs. Fleets patrolled the edge of mapped systems. Science labs studied every trace of the shrine's energy signature. Blacksite AIs ran predictive models day and night, anticipating the next move from the collectors. But no second encounter came. Instead, the galaxy reacted. One by one, smaller species who had once ignored humanity now came forward, not to challenge, but to submit. Some offered alliances, others offered information. A few simply sent apologies. Humanity listened, but never forgot. Admiral Kale was now the head of the United Terran Order, a militarized council representing all surviving human colonies, Earth, Mars, Europa, even the outer rings of Alpha Centauri, unified now by war and trauma. He pushed for expansion, not conquest, but preparation. Because if the shrine had truly stored dying civilizations like books, then someone had written the ending. And Kyle refused to let humanity be just another page in someone else's archive. Elira, however, refused command. She vanished from public view after the final campaign on the core capital world. The media speculated. Statues were built. Songs were written. But she was done with speeches, with war rooms, with the ever-tightening noose of expectations. She had become a symbol, but symbols didn't sleep. Symbols didn't grieve, and she needed to do both. For a time, she lived among the survivors on Luna Station, working anonymously in the medical relief ships. She held the hands of orphans, helped rebuild broken irrigation systems on decimated colonies, taught kids how to read. But even in silence, her legend grew. People whispered when she passed. Some cried, some saluted. And eventually the galaxy stopped fearing her and started believing in her. That's when the second message came. Not from the shrine, from a distant star, one long dead. A transmission carried on quantum dust, repeating endlessly. Elira was summoned back to the Harbinger, now upgraded, rearmed, and even larger. Kale met her in the war chamber, older now, tired, but alive. When she walked in, he smiled faintly. "You always come back?" "I never really left," she replied. He pointed to the screen. The signal pulsed softly, like a heartbeat. Translated by AI, the message was brief. "They're coming. They don't want peace. They want the last spark. You are the last spark." It was signed with a name long thought lost. Juno, the first interstellar scout ship Earth had launched over a century ago. It had vanished into dark space, presumed destroyed. But now, it was alive. Or someone aboard it was. Elira stared at the message for a long time. Her hands didn't tremble. Her voice didn't shake. "What's the protocol?" she asked. Kyle gave her the answer she already knew. "There is none." So, for the second time, humanity prepared not for war, but for something worse. Contact, not diplomatic, not hostile, something else, something they didn't understand. The Terran Armada began forming again, this time not to destroy but to seek, to learn, to protect. And at its center stood the Harbinger, reborn not as a warship, but as a warning. Elira stepped aboard once more, this time not as a soldier, not as a commander, but as the bearer of the flame. The last spark. The ship launched from Earth's orbit in silence, passing beneath a line of banners showing every colony lost, every planet scarred, every world reclaimed. People watched, from towers, from bunkers, from forests and ruins and orbital cities, because they knew. The war had ended, but the fight for existence had just begun. Elira stood at the front of the observation deck, looking at the stars. Somewhere, they were waiting. Whoever they were, whatever they wanted. She didn't care anymore. Let them come, because this time humanity wasn't just ready. They were angry. They were united. And they had an answer for the darkness. We are not the forgotten. We are not the dust. We are the fire. And in the silence of space, the harbinger roared toward the unknown. Not with fear, but with purpose.